Hey folks, Gary here with Paramount Tactical Solutions. So today we're going to be covering scope mounting myths. There's a lot of things that I want to cover, mainly to address some of the comments that I had on my previous how to mount a scope video that you can see here. Also, if you'd like to go check that video out, you can go check it out right here. All that information is valid and good, and we're going to talk about some of that. There's a bunch of bad information out there when it comes to mounting scopes, and that has been propagated, and it's not that people are ignorant, it's just they know so much that isn't true. And that definitely holds true when it comes to mounting scopes and just how scopes work in general. So we're going to address that and hopefully definitively illustrate why the way that I tell people to mount a scope is correct. Now, with that being said, there are other ways to mount a scope. The primary ones that most people use, other than the way that I show people how to mount them in that video, is the flashlight method and the plumb bob method. Both of those can be used effectively. They're just harder to do and to do it well. And anyone that tells me, I've seen in comments, I use a plumb bob and I can get a scope mounted in 2 minutes. Folks, I guarantee you that scope is not actually plumb, level, and square. It's just not. And there's a whole lot of reasons behind that. I have done it every single way. And as a matter of fact, coming from a sniper background, using a plumb bob was how I was taught. And I used that for many years. The way that I show you is more effective, and I've tested all of this stuff, folks. I'm not someone that likes to beat the drum in my background. I'm not a Navy SEAL, so I don't like to talk about myself. But what I can tell you is I've been shooting long range for almost 20 years. I actually went to sniper school in 2003 in Sinjar, Iraq. It was the first sniper school held in a combat theater since Vietnam. And I just fell in love with it. And it's been my passion really ever since. I just love the science behind it. I love the equipment behind it. I just love everything about it. And later on, I became a Green Beret. I was an 18 Bravo, which is a Special Forces weapons sergeant. Our whole lives is weapons. We're trained on almost every weapon in the NATO inventory. I have multiple armor level certifications on many different weapon systems. And not only that, this is what we do for a living. Paramount Tactical Solutions, we're primarily a training company, but I'm constantly troubleshooting and fixing our student guns as well as setting guns up for our clients. So this is my life, and this is what I do, and this is what I love doing. And I constantly test this stuff, and I've been testing these different theories out for many, many years. I test equipment long before YouTube was on the scene. And, I was very reluctant to get into the YouTube thing because of kind of the level of subject matter expertise that YouTube typically represents. I didn't want to be that guy. I didn't want to be associated with that. But, I'm glad I did. And there's some good and bad with that. But again, I love teaching people. I genuinely love teaching people. That's why we started Paramount Tactical Solutions to begin with. I love sharing my experiences and sharing my knowledge with people freely. It really is what I love doing. With all that being said, I'm still definitely a type A guy, former Green Beret, been to combat many times. I'm not exactly conflict averse, right? So, if you come to our channel, I love when people critique us, right? Or challenge us respectfully. I love having those debates. And look, I don't think that I know everything. I think there's definitely room for improvement, and I've been wrong on many things. And I look forward to that opportunity. If somebody proves me wrong or says I'm wrong, I can research that and I can come back and say, hey, look, I got this wrong. I don't have so much ego that I'm not willing to do that. And as a matter of fact, I'm happy to do that because I want to get good information out there. That being said, if you come on the channel and you just start, trolling it like you're wrong, you're an idiot, there's a part of me that just wants to reach through and grab you. I know my character flaws, and I'm working on those things because obviously as a business owner, as an instructor, as someone that wants to reach everybody, including people that might want to disagree with me. And look, I'm a natural skeptic. That's why I test everything. I do not want you to take my word for everything. I want you to go out there, take the information I give you, and test it yourself, right? So anyways, we're going to address some of the things that I see regularly when it comes to scope mounting in general. I want to show you exactly why I chose the method that I chose. I've tested all of this. I've shot tall targets, which we'll talk about in a minute. I've also done tracking tests using these methods. And I want to show you why this works and also address some of the just bad information out there so that you're more informed and you can make the best decision for you. And that's what this channel is always going to be about. And I'm working on my Viking side, right? So we'll get better at that. So let's talk about the first myth that comes up a lot. And that is you can't level a scope based on the turret because turrets, even on the best scopes, are not level. So we have all of these different scopes, different brands, definitely different price points from very cheap to mid-priced to high end. And we're going to actually test that out. So let's talk about why some people might believe that scope turrets aren't level. Well, first of all, we need to know that this is 2022. A lot of this information, or a lot of the bad information out there when it comes to guns in general, everything from break-in to lapping rings, to a lot of information like that, is based on, 1980s, 1970s, even maybe early 1990s technology where, machining just wasn't what it is today. Today, it's very easy, even with the cheapest CNC machines, to create a flat surface that's flat down to, 10,000ths of an inch. So when it comes to creating a flat surface on a turret, that is not hard to do. It's also not very hard to make sure that the erector tube housing, the bottom of that erector tube housing, and the top of that elevation knob isn't perfectly flat and parallel. That's just not hard to do. The other thing that I think a lot of people do is if they even bother to test this stuff, they'll lay these scopes on a table. And, of course, if you don't have something like this, an elevated area that's flat, and you're making sure that this is level along with the top of that, you're gonna get deviation. Also, even a lot of, for instance, I was noticing on this one, we have this enlarged windage knob. So when I go to lay this down on a flat surface, this is actually hitting that surface. So I had to pull out a machine block to get this up here to test this out. So there's lots of different variables as to why someone might not understand why the top of this is flat. So we're just gonna go through it and test these. And I'm gonna show you right here on camera, different scopes, different brands, different price points, and see if we don't have a elevation turret that is indeed flat. So let's go ahead and start with our Night Force here. Here we have pretty much an almost exact flat surface. I've tried to level this table the best that I can. So you can see that that is pretty darn flat right there and level. And now we're just gonna put that in the exact same spot. Now the problem with this is that this Night Force is slightly objective lens heavy, but we're going to put that up there and look at that, folks. Flat turret. It's laying flat. We have neither the windage nor the parallax knob interacting with the table. It is laying flat on the bottom of that, and that is absolutely perfectly flat. All right, let's try another one. Here we have the loophole. Again, we'll make sure that this surface is perfectly flat, pretty darn flat right there and level. We put this up there. Look what we have there. That's pretty darn level, right? So we're good there. Now we got this Vortex Razor HD Gen 3. What a beast of a scope it is. And we'll put that right up there. Look at that, perfectly flat. Now we got the cheapest scope here, and this one's a little funny. I had to pull out this block here. Oh, let's go ahead and do this same thing with this Bushnell Elite. All right, so first let's make sure that our machine surface right here is perfectly flat. That's flat and level. We'll put our Vortex up there. We'll put our Bushnell Elite up there. Folks, it's level. And let's go to the cheapest scope. Now this one's a little odd because we do have a screw down here that creates a wobble. So I have this is a little trigger jig. We're going to put that screw in that area. And there again, this one's actually back heavy. So I'm just going to press and hold it in the front. But there again, folks, it's perfectly level. This is a $300 scope. And did we miss any? I think that's all of them. All right, so hopefully that demonstrably shows that our elevation turrets are going to be level on 99% of all scopes. I'm sure there are outliers. I'm sure that, there's a bad one out there, but generally speaking, and that's how you can test that. Before you mount your scope, check that if you're concerned about that. Make sure you have a good level surface to put it on. Make sure the scope isn't leaning one way or the other because of elevation knobs or parallax knobs. And there again, you can test it for yourself. So, but I think that is a pretty good demonstration of that. So let's talk about myth number 2. Myth number 2 is you don't level the scope to the rail because it doesn't matter because of gravity, right? You're leveling that scope based on gravity. So what that means essentially is I can actually mount this scope. Let me get a bigger one so it's a little more, illustrates it better. I can mount this scope this way onto the rifle, right? We can turn it inside the rings to where it's, let's say it's a 45, doesn't matter. And now all I need to do, even if I have to turn the gun 45 degrees, as long as the scope is level, itself, the gun is completely unlevel, it will still shoot straight. That is absolutely true with zero MOA rails. You can absolutely mount your scope, canted, but then just make sure that when you are actually shooting, the scope itself is level. Maybe you put a level on the scope, however you go about doing it. That's absolutely true. You can still shoot just like that. The scope does not have to be mounted level to the gun itself. It has to be level when you shoot as far as a scope, even if that gun is canted slightly. There's no issue with that on 0 MOA rails. The problem though, is that most of us are shooting with 20 MOA rails or some elevation built into the rail. And the moment that you put elevation into the rail, you are now married to that rail because it has to be level to that rail. It doesn't matter if it's level to the gun. It matters if it's level to that rail. And just so that we understand what's going on here, and I have all right, this is not to scale, just so we're clear. All right, so this is essentially our 20 MOA rail. This is blown up, and I know that the art is amazing. I know that's what you're thinking. But we have it canted in the back, and we have elevation built in. When we have that elevation built in this way, it requires us to raise the muzzle slightly. You can see on this one, raise the muzzle slightly. So we have 20 minutes of angle built in to this mount the moment that we put it on there and we put the scope on there. And if we look at it with the gun level, the barrel's level, but notice how the scope has a slight attitude, downward attitude, and that's what it's gonna look like, folks. And a better illustration, here we have a 20 MOA rail. You can see that right now, that surface that the rail is on is level, but when we put this level on the rail, that represents 20 MOA. To get the rail level, we have to lift this up by about that much. Everybody see that? So that's how a 20 MOA rail works. And the moment that you put a 20 MOA rail on there, you have to mount it level to that rail so that you're not turning elevation into windage and windage into elevation. So hopefully that clears that up. If I didn't explain that good enough or didn't illustrate that good enough, let me know. So to address the next common myth, we kind of need to understand how a scope actually works. So you have this great artist rendition of a scope. We have the external tube right here, and inside here is our erector tube, and that is what houses our reticle. And basically what we have inside here is we have springs. We have at a minimum a spring over here, pushing it this way, and a spring up here pushing it upward. You can see right here on the windage knob, we have a threaded contact point that contacts that erector tube. It's threaded, and when we push that away from us, all right, it's essentially righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. It's actually driving that contact point toward the erector tube. And to change our point of impact to the right, it's actually pushing this entire erector tube to the left. Same thing with elevation. As we drive that erector tube down, as it goes down, it's actually changing our point of impact upward. Hopefully that makes sense. So this is what it looks like. Now, here's the problem. If that erector tube isn't square, all right? If that erector tube is not square, what's going to happen is, and this is the same thing if we mount our scope canted as well on a 20 MOA rail. If we start doing this, it can only drive left or right, up and down. So every time that we dial anything, it's turning windage into elevation and elevation into windage. So folks, if your reticle is not square to your optic, there's two things you can do. You can shoot a tall target test and you can see what the deviation is, and you can actually plug that into your software, but the right answer is to send it back. All right, you need to get rid of this and get you a new one that is actually, manufactured correctly. This is a problem if this is what's going on. The answer is not just to throw up a plumb bob and make sure that our reticle is square. We got to make sure that the interface with that reticle is also square. So that way, when you're dialing elevation, it's true elevation, and when you're dialing windage, it's true windage. And that goes back to the overall problem when people say, hey, I just throw it on, it's good to go. Folks, probably out to 400 yards or so, you can eyeball mounting your scope, and it probably won't make that big of a difference. But if we have a slight cant in it, now as we dial up, it's also driving that reticle over left or right as well. So we're putting windage in there too. So suddenly, let's say I'm shooting at 400, I'm getting hits. Now I go out to 700 yards. And every time that I dial up 3 MOA, it's pushing 1 MOA to the right. I dial what I think I need to dial to get to that 700 yard, and I squeeze the trigger and I miss slightly right. Well, in your mind, you're not thinking, oh, it's because my scope isn't level, all you're gonna do is do some windage and get over that. You will get there eventually. You'll end up bracketing. So here's where the problem lies. If I'm not getting true elevation change when I dial that elevation, if I'm adding windage into it, so let's say I have to go up 6 MOA to now hit this target at 700 yards. But for every 6 MOA, I'm also dialing to the right 2 MOA, for instance. At 700 yards, 2 MOA is 14 inches. Folks, you are missing this target. So now I dial that 6 or 7 MOA and I shoot and I see my impact is over here. Well, I'm like, well, in your mind, all you're thinking is, oh, there's a wind out there or something like that. Now we have to dial over and you hit the target. You never think anything else about it. You're like, oh, okay, this is my dope. It needs to be, 3 MOA left, 2 MOA left, whatever it is, plus the elevation, and that is my dope for that target in these wind conditions. But it's not. All you did was compensate for a reticle or a scope that was canted. And you'll never diagnose it unless you're shooting a tall target test or you're doing a tracking test. It's as simple as that. You'll always think that it's environmental conditions causing these, and you'll end up bracketing on all your targets. So now you go from this target and now you're shooting out at 900 yards. Well, at 900 yards, you have to dial an additional 4 MOA in elevation, which is driving an additional 2 MOA to the right or whatever it is. So now we're at 4 or 5 MOA to the right, and it's consistent. So again, you're just thinking it's a wind issue, and you're compensating for an environmental effect that is not actually taking place. It's a mechanical problem. So this is why it's so important to take the time and ensure that your reticle, first of all, is square to the optic, but then also that your optic is mounted perfectly level and square to the rail that it's mounted on, especially if it's 20 MOA rail. If it's a 0 MOA rail, and as long as that scope is level while you shoot, regardless of how canted the gun is, that is absolutely true. We're mounting the scope based on gravity until we introduce a elevated rail. Then we're married to that rail, and you got to make sure that everything matches up. So there it is, folks. Hopefully this puts some of those scope mounting myths to bed. And again, I'm not saying that the other methods aren't viable. You can, especially the plumb bob method. That can be done correctly. It can be done well. It just takes a lot more effort and time because you got to make sure that that gun is mounted perfectly and locked down perfectly, and then it's perfectly level. And then you got to hang out plumb bob at distance and then make sure everything matches up. It can be done. The method I outlined in my original scope mounting video is probably more accurate and it's easy to do. Now, there are some questions about levels, right? You do have to make sure that your level is good. Folks, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I have at least 6 different levels that I've tested that I feel are good to go. I have about 10 more that I've thrown away or taken back to the store or sent back on Amazon or whatever other place that I've gotten. This is my 3rd stability level that I got. The other 2 that I received were not correct. I actually have a very expensive machinist level that I made sure that this was correct with, that matched up. So again, your results are only as good as your equipment, and it does take time to make sure that you test your equipment and make sure that's good. And folks, I have no problem with critiques. Let's just keep it civil. If not, I'm just gonna start deleting those. So it's not even gonna be an issue. And I want to have those debates, but let's do it like friends because I think we're on the same team, and it's important that us in the gun community stay tight, right? We are not the enemy. And if there's something that you think I'm doing wrong, let me know and we can have a talk about it. Heck, you can call me up on the phone and we'll talk about it. I don't care. Anyways, hopefully that was helpful. Hopefully it was informative. Make sure you join us for our live streams. Make sure you go check out our other social media sites. We want you part of this community. We want to continue to build this community, and other videos that you'd like to see, make sure you put those in the comments down below. But until next time, stay armed, stay ready, and we'll talk to you soon.
Storm is coming, but I'm prepared.